I stood
You
beneath
never
the towering
built
steel
anything
of the
meaningful.
bridge I had given 30 years of my life to.
You
and
brought this
listened
entirely
as my
upon
own
yourself.
son erased me.
Don't
My
look at
mother
me like
never
you're the
really
victim
built
here.
anything Andrew said into the microphone. His voice steady, confident, unquestioned. The crowd nodded. Some even clapped. I didn't move. I couldn't. Because just a few feet behind him, bolted into cold metal for the world to see, was a name no one bothered to read anymore. E. Fairchild. And that name was mine. Before I tell you what really happened, I need to ask you something. If you've ever been misunderstood by someone you love, would you fight to prove the truth, or would you walk away? If this story speaks to you, take a moment to like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? I read every single one. People like to believe that bridges appear out of nowhere. They see steel and concrete stretching across rivers, connecting two distant sides, and they think of it as something inevitable, as if it had always been there waiting to be discovered. They don't think about the people who gave up their lives to build them. I used to be one of those people. My name is Elise Fairchild, and for over 30 years, I was a civil engineer specializing in bridge design. Back when I first started, there weren't many women in the field, certainly not in the rooms where decisions were made. I remember walking into my first project meeting in Chicago in 1989, wearing a navy blazer that didn't quite fit and holding blueprints that I had spent weeks perfecting. No one looked at me. Not really. They looked past me, over me, around me, but not at me. One of the senior engineers, a man named Harold Benton, actually asked me if I was there to take notes. I told him no. I told him I was there to explain why his load distribution calculations were wrong. That was the moment everything changed. Not because they respected me, but because they couldn't ignore me anymore. From that day forward, I learned something important. If I wanted a place in that world, I would have to take it. Quietly, relentlessly, without expecting applause, and so I did. I worked longer hours than anyone else. I double-checked every calculation, then checked it again. I stayed late at construction sites, standing in mud and cold wind, watching as beams were lifted into place, making sure every measurement aligned with what I had designed on paper. Bridges became more than my job. They became my language. Each one told a story of weight, tension, balance, and trust. A bridge only stands if every part does its job. If one section fails, everything collapses. I used to think families worked the same way. Back then, I still believed that. My first major project was a suspension bridge outside Denver. I was 28 years old and terrified every single day that someone would discover I didn't belong there. But I poured everything I had into that project. When the bridge finally opened, I stood at a distance, watching cars drive across something I had helped create. No one knew my name, no plaque, no mention, but I knew, and for a long time, that was enough. That same year, Andrew was born. I remember holding him in the hospital, his tiny fingers wrapping around mine, his breathing soft and steady. I told myself something, then a promise I truly believed I could keep. "I'll build a life for you," I whispered. At the time, I thought that meant security, stability, opportunity. I didn't realize what it would cost. Because bridges don't care about birthdays. They don't pause for school plays or little league games. They don't wait while your child sits by the window, wondering if you're going to walk through the door. And neither did I. I told myself I was doing it for him. Every late night, every missed dinner, every phone call I didn't return, I justified it all with one simple truth. I was building something that would last. Something important, something bigger than myself. But what I didn't understand, what I refused to see, was that Andrew wasn't measuring my love in steel and concrete. He was measuring it in moments, and I wasn't there for most of them. I remember one particular winter in Boston. We were working on a rehabilitation project for an old bridge that had started to show signs of structural fatigue. It was dangerous work, delicate, precise. One wrong move, and the entire structure could become unstable. I was there for nearly 3 months straight. Andrew was 9 years old. He had a school play, something about pioneers or explorers. I don't remember the details now, but I remember the call. Elise Richards said over the phone, his voice calm but tired. "He really wants you there." "I know," I replied, staring at a set of blueprints spread across my desk. I can't leave right now. We're behind schedule and—" "He's not asking for a lot," Richard interrupted gently. "Just one night." I closed my eyes. "I'll try," I said, but I didn't. That night, while Andrew stood on a stage looking out into the audience, I was standing under a bridge, staring up at a cracked support beam, trying to figure out how to keep it from failing. I told myself I was saving lives, but I never asked whose life I was losing. Richard never blamed me outright. That wasn't his way. He was patient, steady, the kind of man who believed that love meant understanding, even when it hurt. He would send me pictures. Andrew holding a trophy. Andrew blowing out birthday candles. Andrew standing a little taller each year without me beside him. Sometimes I would look at those pictures late at night, sitting alone in hotel rooms that all looked the same, and feel something tight in my chest. Guilt, maybe, or fear. But I would push it aside. Because I had deadlines. Because I had responsibilities. Because I believed there would be time later to fix everything. There's always time later. That's what people tell themselves. It's a lie. By the time I started to slow down, by the time I thought I could finally come home and be the mother Andrew needed, he had already learned how to live without me. And worse, he had learned how to resent me. I didn't see it at first. Not clearly. It showed up in small ways. Short answers. Avoided conversations. A distance in his eyes that hadn't been there before. But I told myself it was just a phase. Teenagers pull away. They grow independent. That's normal, isn't it? I didn't realize that what I was seeing wasn't independence. It was damage. Damage I had helped create. And like a bridge with hidden structural flaws, everything looked fine on the surface until the cracks started to spread. Looking back now, I can see the signs. Every missed moment, every broken promise. Every time I chose work over him. I thought I was building a future. But somewhere along the way, I stopped building my family, and I didn't even notice when it began to fall apart. If you asked Andrew Fairchild about his childhood, he wouldn't talk about bridges. He wouldn't mention steel or design or the long nights I spent trying to make something strong enough to carry thousands of lives safely across open space. No, he would talk about empty chairs. I didn't understand that for a long time, not the way I should have. To me, Andrew had everything a child could need. A warm home, a father who loved him deeply, stability, education, opportunity. I made sure of that. I worked for that. But Andrew didn't measure love in what was provided. He measured it in who showed up, and too often I didn't. I remember the first time I truly noticed the shift in him. He was about 13, already taller than most of the boys his age, with that quiet kind of confidence that comes from figuring things out on your own. I had just returned from a project in Seattle, 3 weeks of inspections and meetings that had stretched into something closer to 5. When I walked through the front door, I expected something familiar. A smile, a hug, maybe even a little resentment, but softened by relief. Instead, Andrew barely looked up from the couch. "Hey," I said, setting my bag down. "I'm home." Yeah, he replied, his eyes still on the television. That was it. No excitement, no questions. No, I missed you, just indifference. At the time, I told myself he was just growing up. Teenagers get distant. That's what everyone says. But there was something else in his voice, something colder, something final. That night, I tried to make dinner. It felt strange, almost unfamiliar, standing in my own kitchen. I had spent so many nights eating takeout in hotel rooms that the simple act of cooking felt like stepping into someone else's life. Andrew sat at the table across from me, scrolling through his phone. So I began trying to sound casual. How's school? It's fine. Anything new? No. I nodded, forcing a small smile. I heard you had a game last week. Your dad said you did really well. He shrugged. Yeah, I wish I could have been there, I said softly. That was when he finally looked at me, and the expression in his eyes. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something worse. It was disappointment that had already hardened into expectation. You always say that, he replied. There wasn't any accusation in his tone, just certainty, and somehow that hurt more, because he wasn't expecting anything different anymore. That was the moment I should have changed, the moment I should have stopped everything, every project, every deadline, every excuse, and focused on the one thing that actually mattered. But I didn't, because life doesn't pause at the moment you realize you're making a mistake. It keeps moving. And if you don't actively choose to turn around, you just keep going in the wrong direction. Andrew grew up quickly after that, too quickly. By the time he was in high school, he barely spoke to me at all. Conversations became transactional, short, efficient, stripped of anything emotional. Can you sign this? I need a ride. I'll be home late. That was the extent of it. Richard tried to bridge the gap. He always did. Elise, he would say quietly, after Andrew went to bed, he needs you. I know I would reply, exhaustion heavy in my voice. I'm trying. But the truth was, I wasn't trying hard enough. Trying would have meant changing, and I wasn't ready to do that. So, instead, I kept doing what I had always done. I worked, and Andrew learned to stop needing me. I missed his first real heartbreak. I missed the night he got accepted into college. I even missed the day he decided what he wanted to become. I didn't hear it from him. I heard it from Richard. He wants to go into engineering. Richard told me over the phone one evening, his voice carrying a mix of pride and something else I couldn't quite place. Really? I said, surprised. Like me. There was a pause. Not exactly, Richard replied carefully, but yes, the same field. I felt something stir in my chest. Pride. Hope. Maybe even a second chance. When I finally had the opportunity to talk to Andrew about it, I approached him cautiously, unsure of how he would respond. I heard you're thinking about engineering, I said. Yeah, he replied. That's great, I said, smiling. It's a good field. Challenging, but I know he cut in. The conversation ended there. He didn't ask for advice. He didn't ask for help. He didn't even seem interested in sharing the moment with me. It was as if he had made the decision completely separate from me, as if my experience, my knowledge, my entire career didn't matter. At the time, I didn't understand why that hurt so much. Now I do. Because that was the moment I realized something I had been avoiding for years. Andrew wasn't trying to follow in my footsteps. He was trying to prove he didn't need them. In college, he thrived. Top of his class, internships with major firms. Recognition that came quickly and easily, faster than it ever had for me. People noticed him, respected him, listened to him. Everything I had fought for seemed to come naturally to him, and instead of bringing us closer, it pushed us further apart, because Andrew didn't see me as someone who had paved the way. He saw me as someone who had chosen work over him. someone who had been absent when it mattered most. And no amount of success his or mine could erase that. By the time he graduated, we were strangers. Polite strangers, maybe, but strangers nonetheless. At the ceremony, I sat in the audience watching him walk across the stage. My heart swelled with pride, even as I felt the familiar ache of distance. Afterward, when families gathered for photos and celebrations, Andrew stood with Richard smiling, laughing, fully present in the moment. I hesitated before approaching them. For a second, just a second, I wasn't sure if I belonged there. When I finally stepped forward, Andrew's smile faded slightly. Not completely, just enough. Congratulations, I said, my voice softer than I intended. I'm really proud of you. Thanks, he replied. There was a pause. Awkward? Heavy? I mean it, I added. You've worked really hard. He nodded. Yeah. And then he turned back to Richard, continuing whatever conversation they had been having before I interrupted. Just like that. I stood there for a moment longer, unsure of what to do with my hands, my words, my presence. Eventually, I stepped back, because it was clear. Andrew had built his life without me, and now there wasn't a place for me in it. What I didn't realize then, what I wouldn't understand until much later, was that Andrew hadn't just grown up without me. He had rewritten the story of who I was. In his version, I wasn't a woman who sacrificed everything to build something meaningful. I was a mother who chose not to be there. And once a story like that takes hold, it's almost impossible to change. If there was one person who believed in me when no one else did, not my colleagues, not the industry, not even my own son. In the end, it was Richard Fairchild, my husband, Andrew's father, and the man I didn't fully appreciate until it was far too late. Richard had never cared about bridges. Not really. He used to joke that he didn't understand why anyone would spend their life thinking about things that just sit there and don't move. I prefer people, he would say with a quiet smile. They're unpredictable. More interesting. He was a high school history teacher, steady patient, the kind of man who could explain complicated things in a way that made you feel safe instead of small. His classroom was always full, not because he was strict, but because students trusted him. I used to envy that. The way people naturally gravitated toward him. The way Andrew did. Because where I was rigid, Richard was flexible. Where I was distant, he was present. And where I built structures out of steel, Richard built something far more fragile and far more important. He built a home. I remember the early years of our marriage, back when everything still felt balanced, back when I believed I could have both. We were living in a small house just outside Cleveland. Nothing fancy, but warm. There was always music playing, usually something old, something soft, and the smell of coffee lingering in the mornings. Richard would sit at the kitchen table, grading papers, glasses perched low on his nose, while I reviewed blueprints beside him. We didn't talk much during those moments, but we didn't need to. There was comfort in the silence, understanding, partnership. I like watching you work, he told me once, glancing up from a stack of essays. Why? I asked, not looking away from my calculations. Because you care, he said simply. I remember pausing then, just for a second. No one had ever said that to me before. Not like that. Most people saw my work as ambition, or stubbornness, or something to compete with. But Richard saw something else. He saw intention, purpose, and he respected it. That was the difference. He didn't try to change me. He just stood beside me, even when it wasn't easy. Especially when it wasn't easy. As my career grew, so did the distance between the life I had at work and the life I had at home. Richard never complained outright, but there were moments, small quiet moments, that said everything he didn't. Like the time I came home after missing Andrew's birthday. He had just turned 10. Double digits, a milestone I had promised I wouldn't miss. But a last-minute complication on a project in Phoenix had kept me there longer than expected. By the time I made it back, the party was over. The decorations were half taken down. The cake was gone. Andrew was already asleep. Richard was in the kitchen washing dishes. "I'm sorry," I said, standing in the doorway. He didn't turn around right away. "I know," he replied. His voice wasn't angry. That almost made it worse. I tried to get back sooner, but Elise, he interrupted, gently setting a plate down in the sink. "You don't have to explain." I swallowed hard. "But I do." I insisted. I promised him. "And you broke that promise," he said finally, turning to face me. There was no accusation in his eyes, just sadness. "He waited for you," Richard continued quietly. For a long time, the words settled into my chest like weight. "I'll talk to him in the morning," I said quickly. "I'll make it up to him." Richard nodded, but something in his expression told me he didn't believe that would be enough. And deep down, neither did I. Still, life moved on. It always does. Years passed. Projects came and went. Andrew grew older. And Richard? Richard nodded, but something in his expression told me he didn't believe that would be enough. And deep down, neither did I. Still, life moved on. It always does. Years passed. Projects came and went. Andrew grew older, and Richard remained the constant, the one who stayed, the one who filled in the gaps I left behind, the one who made sure our son never went completely without. Until one day he couldn't anymore. It started small. Fatigue, a cough that lingered longer than it should have. At first we dismissed it. Stress maybe, overwork, life. But then came the diagnosis: cancer. I remember sitting in that hospital room, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling the air, as the doctor explained everything in calm, measured tones. Stage 3. Aggressive, treatable, but uncertain. I didn't hear most of it. Not really, because all I could focus on was Richard's hand in mine. Steady, warm, reassuring. Even then, even in that moment, he was the one comforting me. "It's going to be okay," he said softly. I nodded, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I believed that. Treatment changed everything. The house felt different, quieter, heavier. Andrew came home more often, spending hours sitting beside his father, talking about things I wasn't part of. Sometimes I would stand in the doorway watching them, feeling like an outsider in my own family. I told myself it was temporary, that things would go back to normal. But they didn't, because time doesn't wait for you to be ready. As Richard's condition worsened, I found myself faced with a choice I had avoided my entire life: stay or leave, work or family. For once, the answer seemed obvious. I stayed. I took time off, canceled projects, ignored calls. For the first time in decades, I put everything else aside, and yet it felt like I was already too late. One evening, a few weeks before he passed, Richard asked me to sit with him. The sun was setting, casting a soft, orange glow through the window. The room was quiet, except for the faint sound of a clock ticking somewhere in the background. "There's something I need you to do," he said. "Anything," I replied quickly. He gestured toward a small wooden box on the nightstand. It was simple, unremarkable, something I had seen 100 times without ever really noticing. "Take that," he said. I picked it up, feeling its unexpected weight. "What is it?" I asked. "A safety net," he replied. I frowned slightly. "For what?" He smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "For the day everything falls apart." Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. "Richard," I began, but he shook his head gently. "Just promise me," he said. I hesitated. "I promise." He nodded, satisfied. "Don't open it yet," he added. "Not until you really need to." I didn't understand. Not then. To me, it was just another one of his quiet, thoughtful gestures, something meant to comfort, to prepare. I didn't realize it was something much more. A few days later, Richard Fairchild passed away. And with him, the last person who truly held our family together. At the funeral, Andrew stood beside me, silent, distant. We didn't hold hands. We didn't comfort each other. We simply stood. Two people bound by loss, but separated by everything else. After that, the house felt empty in a way I had never experienced before. Not just quiet, but hollow. And somewhere in that silence, the distance between Andrew and me became something permanent, something unspoken, something neither of us knew how to fix. The wooden box sat untouched on my nightstand for years, a quiet reminder of a promise I wasn't ready to keep, a truth I wasn't ready to face, because deep down I knew. When I finally opened it, everything would change. The last bridge I ever worked on was supposed to be my legacy. I didn't know that at the time. To me, it was just another project, bigger than most, yes, more complex, more visible, but still part of the same rhythm I had followed my entire life. Deadlines, calculations, responsibility. But looking back now, I can see it clearly. That bridge wasn't just steel and concrete. It was the place where everything I had built, my career, my reputation, my relationship with my son, would either hold or collapse. The project was announced 2 years after Richard passed away. A major infrastructure initiative connecting two parts of Pittsburgh that had long been separated by both geography and time. The existing bridge was aging, unstable, no longer capable of supporting the volume of traffic the city demanded. They needed something new, something stronger, something that would last. And somehow, my name came up. I still remember the call. "Elise, we want you to lead the design," said the voice on the other end. It was from the firm I had worked with on several high-profile projects over the years. I hesitated, not because I doubted my ability, but because something inside me, something quieter, more cautious than the woman I used to be, wondered if I still belonged in that world. "I'm not sure I'm the right person anymore," I admitted. There was a brief pause. "You're exactly the right person," the voice replied firmly. "This project needs someone who understands long-term integrity. Not shortcuts, not compromises, integrity." The word stayed with me long after the call ended, because that was what I had built my career on. Not recognition, not fame, just doing things the right way. So I said yes. And for the first time in years, I felt something stir inside me again. Purpose. The project itself was unlike anything I had worked on before. The river conditions were unpredictable, the soil unstable in certain areas, and the design had to account for both modern traffic demands and environmental regulations. It was complicated, demanding, exactly the kind of challenge I had always thrived on. But this time, there was something different, something I hadn't expected. Andrew was involved. I didn't find out right away. At first, it was just a name mentioned in passing during a coordination meeting. "Fairchild Consulting Group will be handling structural assessments on the east side," someone said. I didn't react. Not immediately. Fairchild was a common enough name. It could have been anyone. But then I saw the report. Signed, Andrew Fairchild, my son. For a moment, I just stared at the page. My heart didn't race. It didn't drop. It just paused, as if it didn't quite know how to process what it was seeing. We were working on the same project, the same bridge. After years of distant silence and unresolved tension, life had brought us back into the same space, not as mother and son, but as professionals, colleagues, strangers with the same last name. I didn't know how to feel about that. Part of me hoped quietly, cautiously, that this could be something more. A chance to reconnect, to rebuild. After all, bridges are meant to bring things together, aren't they? The first time I saw him at the site, it was early morning. It was early morning. The air was cold, sharp, with the scent of water and steel. Workers moved in the background, equipment humming softly as preparations for the day began. Andrew stood near the edge of the platform reviewing a set of documents. Air was cold, sharp, with the scent of water and steel. Workers moved in the background, equipment humming softly as preparations for the day began. Andrew stood near the edge of the platform reviewing a set of documents. He looked different, older, of course, more confident, more composed. But there was something else, too. A kind of distance that wasn't just emotional anymore. It was deliberate, as if he had built walls of his own and made sure they were strong enough to keep me out. I walked toward him slowly, my footsteps measured. "Andrew," I said. He looked up. For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. But it disappeared almost instantly. "Ms. Fairchild," he replied. "Not Mom, not even Elise, just Miss Fairchild." The formality of it hit harder than any insult could have. "I didn't realize you were assigned to this project," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was brought in for structural evaluation," he replied. "Independent review." Independent. Of course. He wasn't working with me. He was working around me. "I see," I said. There was a pause. Awkward. Heavy. "This is a critical build." He continued, his tone shifting into something more professional, more guarded. "There's no room for error." "I'm aware," I replied. Our eyes met briefly, and in that moment, I saw it. Not just distance, not just coldness, but doubt. He didn't trust me, not as an engineer, not as his mother, not at all. The realization settled deep in my chest, but I didn't let it show. Because I had spent my entire life learning how to hold things together under pressure, even when everything inside me wanted to break. Work began. Days turned into weeks, and despite everything, we did our jobs, efficiently, professionally, without crossing any lines that might force us to confront what we had become. We communicated through reports, through meetings, through other people. Never directly unless absolutely necessary. It was as if we had built an invisible barrier between us, a structure more rigid than any bridge I had ever designed. But tension has a way of building, even when you try to ignore it. And this project, this bridge, was carrying more than just weight. It was carrying years of silence, resentment, and things left unsaid. I noticed it first in the way Andrew reviewed my designs. Every calculation I submitted came back with questions. Every decision I made was scrutinized, challenged. Not aggressively, not openly, but consistently, relentlessly. At first, I told myself it was just professionalism, due diligence. He was doing his job, but the pattern became impossible to ignore. He wasn't just reviewing the work. He was looking for something, a flaw, a mistake, a reason. And slowly I began to understand. Andrew wasn't trying to prove the bridge was safe. He was trying to prove that I wasn't. And that was when I realized this project wasn't going to bring us back together. It was going to push us even further apart. Because this time, it wasn't just about the past. It was about trust. And trust, once broken, is far harder to rebuild than any bridge. The first accusation came quietly. Too quietly. If you've spent enough time in engineering, you learn that the most dangerous failures are rarely loud at the beginning. They don't announce themselves with alarms or flashing warnings. They begin as small inconsistencies, tiny cracks, easy to overlook until they aren't. For me, it started with an email. Subject line, urgent review, required structural integrity, concern. I stared at the words for a long moment before opening it, a strange unease settling in my chest. My designs had gone through multiple levels of review already. Every load calculation, every material specification, every stress tolerance checked, verified, and rechecked again. There shouldn't have been any issues. There couldn't have been. But when I opened the attached document, my hands went cold. Highlighted in red were sections of my design, critical load-bearing calculations marked as potentially unsafe, incorrect weight distribution, insufficient reinforcement, risk of structural fatigue under long-term stress. I blinked, scanning the numbers again and again. They weren't mine, not the way I had written them. Something had been altered. At first, I assumed it was a mistake, a formatting error, a miscommunication, something small, something fixable. But then I saw the name at the bottom of the report. Andrew Fairchild. My son. I leaned back in my chair, slowly, my mind trying to make sense of what I was seeing. He hadn't come to me. He hadn't asked for clarification. He hadn't even questioned the data directly. He had filed an official concern against me. The meeting was scheduled the next morning. Full review board, project leadership, independent assessors, and Andrew. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid of the accusations. I knew my work, but because something deeper, something far more painful had started to settle in. This wasn't just about engineering. This was personal. The conference room was already full when I arrived. People I had worked with for years. Colleagues who had trusted my judgment on projects worth millions, now sitting across from me with doubt in their eyes. I took my seat, placing my folder neatly in front of me, my movements controlled, deliberate, professional, always professional. Andrew sat on the opposite side of the table. He didn't look at me. "Let's begin," said Victor Hale. I recognized the name immediately. Senior Project Executive. A man known for efficiency results and a certain willingness to cut corners if it meant meeting deadlines. I had avoided working closely with him in the past. Now, I didn't have that luxury. We've received a structural integrity report that raises serious concerns about the current design. I had avoided working closely with him in the past. Now I didn't have that luxury. We've received a structural integrity report that raises serious concerns about the current design. Victor continued. Mr. Fairchild, would you like to summarize your findings? Mr. Fairchild. Not Andrew, not even a hint of personal connection. Just professional distance. Andrew nodded, flipping open his report. The revised load calculations indicate a potential imbalance in weight distribution across the central span. He began, his voice calm, steady. Over time, this could lead to accelerated fatigue in key support structures. I listened carefully, every word, every number, because what he was describing wasn't my design. These calculations, I said, finally speaking, are not consistent with my original model. Andrew looked up then, for the first time. They're based on the latest submitted data, he replied. That data has been modified, I said firmly. A murmur moved through the room. Victor leaned forward slightly. Are you suggesting the report is inaccurate? He asked. I'm saying it doesn't reflect my work, I replied. Andrew's expression didn't change. If there's been a discrepancy, he said, then it's your responsibility to explain it. The words landed harder than they should have, not because of what they meant, but because of who said them. I met his gaze, searching for something, anything, that might suggest hesitation, doubt, conflict, but there was nothing, just certainty, cold, unwavering certainty. The review continued for hours. Data presented, arguments made, questions raised, and through it all, one thing became painfully clear. The board wasn't just considering the possibility of an error. They were preparing for the reality of it. By the end of the meeting, the decision was made. Pending further investigation, I was to be removed from active leadership on the project. Temporary, they said. Standard procedure. But we all knew what it meant. I had been sidelined, discredited. And worst of all, Andrew had been the one to initiate it. The official document arrived later that afternoon. I read it slowly, each word feeling heavier than the last. Based on the findings presented, the board has approved the recommendation for immediate reassignment of Elise Fairchild. Recommendation approved. Signed. I turned to the final page, and there it was, the signature that made everything real. Andrew Fairchild. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not because I didn't understand what had happened, but because I did. This wasn't just a professional decision. It was a judgment. And my own son had passed it. I left the office early that day. Not in a rush, not in anger, just quietly. As if moving too quickly might make everything collapse completely. Outside, the sky was overcast, heavy with clouds that threatened rain, but never quite delivered it. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the distant outline of the bridge, half-built, incomplete, strong in some places, fragile in others. It looked exactly how I felt. I had spent my entire life making sure structures didn't fail, making sure every load was accounted for, every weakness reinforced. And yet somehow I had failed to protect the one thing that mattered most: trust. Because trust, like any structure, needs a foundation. And ours had been cracked for years. Now it was breaking, and this time there was no easy way to fix it. The story didn't belong to me anymore. That was the first thing I realized the morning after I was removed from the project. Because by the time I woke up, the narrative had already been written, and I wasn't the one holding the pen. I found out the same way everyone else did. Through the news. Elise Fairchild, a senior engineer with over 3 decades of experience, has been formally removed from the Pittsburgh Bridge project following concerns over potential structural design flaws. I stared at the television screen, the reporter's voice distant, almost unreal. Independent review suggests that errors in load distribution calculations could have compromised long-term safety. Errors, compromised, risk. The words echoed in my mind, each one carefully chosen. Each one shaping a version of the truth that wasn't mine. They showed a picture of mean old professional headshot taken years ago, back when I still believed recognition didn't matter. Now it was being used as a symbol of failure, and beneath it, in bold letters, designer under investigation. I muted the television. But the silence didn't help, because the damage had already been done. Within hours, my phone began to ring. Colleagues, former clients, people who had once trusted me with projects that carried real lives across real distances, now calling not to ask what happened, but to confirm what they had already decided to believe. Is it true? What went wrong? How could you let this happen? I tried to explain. At first, I told them the data had been altered, that the report didn't reflect my original design, that something wasn't right. But explanations require trust, and trust was something I no longer had. Because the story they were hearing made more sense than anything I could say. A veteran engineer, past her prime, making a critical mistake on her final project. It was simple, believable, complete. And once a story feels complete, people stop looking for anything else. By midday, the calls stopped. Not because people were satisfied, but because they had already moved on. And just like that, I was alone. I didn't leave the house for 2 days, not out of fear, not even out of shame, but because I needed time to understand what had happened, to go back through every calculation, every document, every revision I had submitted. I spread everything out across the dining table, the same table where Richard used to sit grading papers, where Andrew used to do his homework. Now it was covered in blueprints, numbers, evidence, proof, or at least what should have been proof. I worked through it methodically, just like I always had, checking each figure, each load estimate, each stress tolerance, and every time I reached the same conclusion. My design was sound. There was no flaw, no miscalculation, no error, which meant only one thing. Someone had changed it. The realization didn't come with anger. Not immediately. It came with something colder, something more dangerous. Clarity. Because if the design had been altered, then this wasn't an accident. It was intentional. And that raised a question I wasn't sure I was ready to answer. Who would do something like this? And more importantly, why I thought about Andrew, about the way he had looked at me during the meeting, the certainty in his voice, the complete absence of doubt. He believed it, every word of it. To him, this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was confirmation. Confirmation of something he had already decided about me long ago. That I wasn't reliable, that I wasn't present, that I wasn't enough. And now, he had proof. Or at least, what he thought was proof. That hurt more than anything else. Because it meant I wasn't just fighting to clear my name. I was fighting against a version of myself that my own son believed was true. And that kind of belief doesn't break easily. On the third day, I forced myself to go back to the site. Not because I was allowed to be there. I wasn't, but because I needed to see it. The bridge, the structure I had poured everything into. From a distance, it looked the same. Unchanged, solid, as if nothing had happened. Workers moved across the platform equipment, humming progress continuing without interruption. Because projects don't stop for people. They move forward, with or without you. I stood at the edge of the restricted area, watching as sections of steel were lifted into place. Sections I had designed, calculated, trusted, now being assembled under someone else's direction, someone else's name. And that was when I saw him. Andrew, standing near the center of the site, reviewing documents with a group of engineers. Confident, composed, in control, exactly where I used to stand. For a moment, I considered leaving, turning around, walking away, because I already knew how that conversation would go. But something inside me, something that had been quiet for too long, refused to let me. So I walked forward. Andrew. He turned, and just like before the moment our eyes met, something flickered and disappeared. "You shouldn't be here," he said, No greeting, no hesitation, just distance. "I need to talk to you," I replied. "There's nothing to talk about." "Yes, there is," I said, stepping closer. "The data you reviewed, it's been altered." He shook his head immediately. "No, I've checked everything." I continued. "Those aren't my calculations. Someone changed them." "Stop," he interrupted. His voice wasn't loud, but it was final. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Making excuses." The words hit harder than I expected. "I'm not making excuses," I said, my voice tightening. "I'm telling you the truth." Andrew let out a short, humorless laugh. "The truth," he repeated. "You mean the version where nothing is ever your fault?" I stared at him. "I've spent my entire career taking responsibility for my work," I said. "You know that?" "No," he replied coldly. "I don't." There it was. Not just doubt, not just anger, but something deeper. Something that had been building for years. "You weren't there, Mom," he continued. "Not when it mattered. Not when I needed you. So don't stand here now and expect me to just trust you." The words landed like a verdict. Final. Unquestionable. This wasn't about the bridge. Not really. This was about everything that had come before it. Every absence. Every broken promise. Every moment I wasn't there. And now it had all come back. Shaped into something solid. Something undeniable. "I'm trying to fix this," I said quietly. Andrew shook his head. "No," he replied. "You're trying to fix your reputation." He turned away then, conversation over, just like that. I stood there for a moment longer, the noise of the construction site fading into something distant, something irrelevant. Because in that moment, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. This wasn't just a professional battle. It was personal, and I wasn't just fighting to prove the design was right. I was fighting to prove that I was. And right now, I was losing both. The truth doesn't arrive all at once. It never does. It comes in fragments, small, uneven pieces that don't seem to fit together at first. Pieces you almost miss if you aren't paying attention. For me, it started with a man I hadn't thought about in years. Thomas Green. I ran into him by accident. At least, that's what I told myself at the time. I had gone downtown to meet with an old colleague, someone who still believed in me enough to listen. The cafe was quiet, tucked away between two older buildings, the kind of place where conversations stayed low and unnoticed. I wasn't expecting to see anyone familiar, especially not him. "Elise?" I turned at the sound of my name, and there he was, older, of course, his hair grayer than I remembered, but unmistakable. Thomas Green had once been one of the most respected structural engineers in the region. Brilliant, sharp, and dangerously ambitious. We had worked together early in my career, and we had not parted on good terms. "Thomas," I said carefully. "It's been a long time," he replied, offering a small, measured smile. Not long enough, I thought, but I didn't say it. Instead, I nodded. "Yes, it has." There was a pause, the kind filled with unspoken history. "You've been in the news," he said casually, though his eyes were anything but. I stiffened slightly. "I'm aware." "I imagine you are," he replied. "That's why I wanted to talk to you." Something in his tone made my chest tighten. "You wanted to?" I asked. "So this isn't a coincidence?" Thomas shook his head. "No," he said. "It isn't." The words settled heavily between us. For a moment, I considered walking away, turning around, leaving whatever this was behind. But instinct years of trusting it in high-pressure situations told me not to. "What do you want, Thomas?" I asked. He glanced around the cafe before gesturing toward a corner table. "Sit," he said. "This isn't something you want to discuss standing up." I hesitated. Then slowly, I sat. Thomas took the seat across from me, leaning forward slightly, his voice lowering. "You didn't make those mistakes," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. My heart skipped. "You don't know that," I replied carefully. "I do," he said. "Because I've seen the original design." I froze. "What?" He reached into his bag and pulled out a folder thin, worn at the edges, but unmistakably official. "I shouldn't have this," he admitted, "but I do." He slid it across the table. I stared at it for a moment before opening it. Inside were my calculations. My real calculations. Unaltered. Precise. Exactly as I had created them. My hands trembled slightly as I flipped through the pages. This is my original submission," I whispered. "I know," Thomas replied. I looked up at him, my mind racing. "Where did you get this?" He hesitated, and that was all the answer I needed. "You were involved," I said quietly. His expression tightened. "Not the way you think," he said. "Then explain it to me," I demanded. "Because right now, it looks like you just admitted to having access to documents that were used to discredit me." Thomas leaned back slightly, exhaling. "You remember Victor Hale?" he asked. The name sent a cold ripple through me. "Yes. He's been pushing this project harder than anyone," Thomas continued. "Deadlines, budgets, public pressure. He doesn't care about perfection. He cares about completion." "I know that," I said. "What does that have to do with this?" Thomas met my gaze. "Your design was too expensive." The words landed slowly. He let them sink in. "It required higher-grade materials," he continued. "Additional reinforcement, longer construction time, all things that don't sit well with someone trying to cut costs." I felt something shift inside me, a realization forming. "So they changed it," I said. Thomas nodded. "They simplified key components, reduced material strength in certain areas, adjusted load tolerances just enough to make it pass, but not enough to make it safe long term." My stomach turned, and when I noticed inconsistencies, he added, I started asking questions. "What happened?" I asked. I was told to drop it. Of course he was. And Andrew. I asked, my voice quieter now. "How does he fit into this?" Thomas hesitated again, and this time it lasted longer. "He doesn't know," he said finally. I stared at him. "You're sure?" "He believes the data he reviewed," Thomas replied. "Because that's the data he was given." I closed my eyes briefly. Of course, Andrew hadn't betrayed me. Not intentionally. He had been used, just like I had. But the damage was already done. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Thomas gave a small, bitter smile. "Because I made the same mistake once," he said. I frowned. "What do you mean?" He looked down at his hands. "Years ago, on a project we worked on together," he said. I chose the easier path, the faster solution. I told myself it wouldn't matter. I remembered. A bridge in Ohio. A disagreement we had never resolved. "I walked away when you refused to compromise," he continued. "And I let them move forward without you. And it failed," I said quietly. He nodded. "Not immediately," he admitted, "but eventually." The memory hit me like a wave. I had tried to stop it, tried to warn them, but no one had listened. And now I asked. Thomas looked at me again. "This one won't fail tomorrow," he said. Or next year. But it will fail. The certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. And when it does, people will get hurt. Silence filled the space between us. Heavy. Unavoidable. What do you want me to do? I asked. Thomas didn't hesitate this time. Prove it, he said. I let out a slow breath. They've already discredited me, I said. No one's going to listen. They will if you have evidence, he replied. Real evidence. I looked down at the folder in my hands. This isn't enough, I said. No. Thomas agreed. It's not. He reached into his bag again and pulled out something smaller, a flash drive. There's more, he said. Internal communications, revised drafts, proof of changes. I stared at it. This was it. The truth. The chance to clear my name, but also the chance to expose something much bigger. And Andrew? I asked softly. Thomas's expression softened slightly. He deserves to know, he said. I nodded slowly. Because for the first time since all of this began, I wasn't just fighting to prove I was right. I was fighting to protect something. Lives, truth, and maybe, just maybe, the chance to rebuild what I had lost. I had carried Richard's box for years, from one room to another, from one stage of grief to the next, always within reach, but never opened, because promises, real promises, have weight. And somewhere deep inside, I had always known that opening it wouldn't just reveal something. It would demand something from me in return. That night, I sat alone in our bedroom, the house wrapped in a silence that felt heavier than usual. Thomas's words echoed in my mind. Prove it. The flash drive lay on the nightstand. So did the box. Two different kinds of truth. One logical, one personal. I reached for the box slowly, my fingers brushing over the smooth wood. It was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had just made it bigger in my mind all these years. Richard's voice came back to me. Not until you really need to. I closed my eyes briefly. I need it now, I whispered. Then I opened it. Inside there wasn't what I expected. No official documents, no legal papers, no clear instructions. Just a letter. Folded neatly, and beneath it, a small envelope sealed. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the letter. The paper was worn at the edges as if it had been handled more than once before being placed inside. I unfolded it carefully, and for a moment, I couldn't read, because seeing his handwriting again, it felt like opening something deeper than memory. It felt like opening him. I forced myself to focus. Elise. If you're reading this, it means something has gone wrong. Not just with work, but with us. With Andrew. My breath caught. I know you better than anyone, even when you think I don't. I know how hard you've worked. I know what you've sacrificed, but I also know what it cost you and what it cost him. Tears blurred the words, but I kept reading. Andrew doesn't hate you. He's hurt, and hurt people don't always know how to say what they need, so they turn it into something else. Distance, anger, judgment. My hands tightened slightly around the paper. You think he stopped needing you? That he chose to push you away? But Elise children don't stop needing their parents. They just stop asking. I closed my eyes, the weight of those words pressing into something raw and unguarded inside me. Because I had believed that, for years, that Andrew had simply moved on, that he didn't need me anymore. But what if? What if he had needed me the whole time, and I just wasn't there to see it? I forced myself to continue. There's something you don't know. My heart began to pound, and I didn't tell you before because I thought I had more time. The words that followed changed everything. Andrew applied for an internship with your firm when he was 19. I froze. He never told you, because he wanted to earn it on his own. He wanted you to see him not as your son, but as someone worthy. My vision blurred completely now. He didn't get it. My chest tightened, not because he wasn't good enough, but because someone higher up didn't want complications. They thought hiring your son would look like favoritism. I sank back slightly, the letter trembling in my hands. Andrew never told you, but I was there when he got the rejection. And I've never seen him that quiet. A tear slipped down my cheek. He didn't blame them. He blamed you. The words hit like a crack through something already fragile. He thought if you had been there more, if people knew you differently, if your name didn't carry distance along with respect, maybe things would have been different. I shook my head slowly as if denying it could somehow undo it. But deep down, it made sense. That was the moment he decided he would never rely on you. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't believe he could. The silence in the room became unbearable, so he built his own path. Not to replace you, but to prove to himself that he didn't need what he had already lost. I pressed the letter to my chest, my breathing uneven. Everything I thought I understood about Andrew, everything I believed about our distance. It wasn't just about absence, it was about rejection. A rejection he had never spoken about. A wound I had never seen. And now, it had shaped everything between us. I wiped my eyes and continued reading. If you're opening this, it means something has broken. Maybe with your work, maybe with him, maybe both. But listen to me carefully, Elise. You don't fix this with proof. You fix it with truth. I glanced at the flash drive, at the evidence, at the fight waiting for me, and suddenly it didn't feel like enough. Andrew doesn't need you to be perfect. He needs you to be honest, even if it hurts, especially if it hurts. My breath caught again, and one more thing, I looked down at the final lines. The project you're working on, I looked into it before I got sick. Something didn't feel right. I couldn't prove it, but I trusted my instincts. So I left you something else. I stared at the envelope beneath the letter. Slowly, I picked it up. My fingers hesitated at the seal. Then I opened it. Inside was a photograph and a set of handwritten notes. The photo showed a meeting room, blurry, taken from a distance. But the people inside were clear enough. Victor Hale, Thomas Green, and someone else. Someone I didn't recognize at first. Until I looked closer. Until my breath stopped completely. Andrew, younger, standing at the edge of the room, watching, not part of the conversation, but present, and the notes beneath the photo. They weren't calculations. They were names, dates, and one line underlined twice. Cost reduction proposal approved before final design submission. My hands went cold. This wasn't new. This wasn't recent. This had been planned from the beginning. And Andrew, he had been there, not as part of it, but close enough to be pulled into it, close enough to be used. The realization hit me all at once. This wasn't just about exposing Victor, or fixing the design, or clearing my name. This was about something deeper, a system, a pattern, and a choice Andrew had been forced into without even realizing it. I sat there for a long time, the letter still in my lap, the photograph resting in my hands. For the first time since everything began, I understood the full weight of what I was facing. Not just a corrupted project, not just a broken relationship, but both, intertwined, fragile, and on the verge of collapse. But this time, I wasn't going to walk away. Because Richard was right. This wasn't about proving I was right. It was about telling the truth, even if it broke everything first. I didn't go back to the site the next day, or the day after that, not because I was afraid of Andrew, but because I needed to decide how to face him. Richard's words wouldn't leave me alone. You don't fix this with proof. You fix it with truth. For most of my life, truth and proof had meant the same thing. Numbers, data, results. But now I was beginning to understand how wrong I had been. Because what Andrew needed wasn't just evidence. He needed to understand me, and I needed to understand him. Still, I brought the evidence with me anyway. Because this wasn't just about us anymore. People could get hurt, and I wouldn't let that happen. I found him late in the afternoon. The site was quieter than usual, most of the crew already gone. The sky was turning that soft gray blue that comes just before evening, when everything feels suspended between day and night. Andrew stood alone near the center span, looking out over the river. For a moment, I just watched him. Not as an engineer, not as an opponent, but as my son. The boy who used to sit at the kitchen table with his father, asking questions about everything. The boy I had missed more times than I could count. Andrew. He didn't turn immediately, but I saw his shoulders stiffen. I thought I made it clear he said, his voice calm, but distant. "You're not supposed to be here." "I know," I replied, "but I'm not here as part of the project." That made him turn. His expression was guarded, tired, and something else. Frustration. "Then why are you here?" he asked. I took a slow breath. "Because I need to tell you something," I said. "You've already said enough," he replied. "At the meeting, at the site, every time you try to explain." "I'm not here to explain," I interrupted. That stopped him, just for a second. "I'm here to tell you the truth," I said quietly. He let out a short breath, almost a laugh. "Your truth," he said. "Right." I shook my head. "No," I said. "Not mine. Ours." That confused him. I could see it. And for the first time in a long time, I had his attention. I stepped closer, but not too close. Just enough. "I read something last night," I said. "Something your father left for me." His expression shifted slightly at that. "Dad?" he asked. I nodded. "He wrote it before he died," I continued. "About you. About us." Andrew's jaw tightened. "You don't get to use him like that," he said sharply. "Not now." "I'm not using him," I said, my voice steady. "I'm listening to him. Finally." Silence. Tense. Fragile. "He told me about the internship," I said. "That did it." Andrew froze, completely. For a moment, I thought he hadn't heard me, but then his eyes changed. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said quickly. "Yes, I do," I replied. "You applied when you were 19. You didn't tell me because you wanted to earn it on your own." His breathing shifted, slightly faster now. "And when you didn't get it," I continued softly, "you thought it was because of me." "Stop," he said. But his voice wasn't as strong as before. "It wasn't your fault. And when you didn't get it," I continued softly, "you thought it was because of me." "Stop," he said. but his voice wasn't as strong as before. "It wasn't your fault," I said. "They didn't hire you because they were afraid of how it would look. Not because you weren't good enough." I said, "Stop," he repeated. This time louder. But I didn't stop, because I finally understood something I should have seen years ago. "You thought I wasn't there for you," I said. "And you were right. I wasn't. But that doesn't mean I didn't believe in you." Andrew's hands clenched at his sides. "You don't get to say that now," he said. "You weren't there when it mattered." "I know," I said. The words came out before I could soften them. "I know I wasn't there," I continued. "And I can't change that. I can't fix those moments. But I can tell you the truth about this one." He looked at me then. Really looked. As if trying to decide whether I meant it. "Someone changed the design," I said. He shook his head instinctively. "No." "Yes," I said firmly, "and I can prove it." I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder Thomas had given me along with the flash drive. Andrew didn't take them. He just stared. "This isn't about saving my reputation," I said. "It's about stopping something dangerous." "You expect me to just believe you?" he asked. "No," I replied. "I expect you to look at the evidence." He hesitated. Then slowly he took the folder, flipped it open. His eyes moved quickly across the pages at first, professional detached. But then they slowed. His brow furrowed slightly. "That's not," he murmured. "My original submission," I said. He looked up. Confusion. Real confusion. Then he looked back down again, comparing the numbers. Cross-checking. Recalculating. I watched the moment it happened, the exact moment doubt entered. "These values," he said slowly, "they're different from the report." "Yes, that's not possible," he said, though his voice had already lost its certainty. "It is," I replied. He went quiet, really quiet. Then his eyes shifted to the flash drive. "What's on that?" he asked. "Everything else," I said. "Internal communications, draft revisions, proof of what they did." "Who?" he asked. "Victor Hale," I said. Andrew's head snapped up. "No," he said immediately. "Yes," I repeated. He shook his head, backing up slightly. "He's been leading this project from the St. Art," he said. He would. "No," he said immediately. "Yes," I repeated. He shook his head, backing up slightly. "He's been leading this project from the start," he said. He would, I said, and he did. I took a step closer. "Andrew, you were right about one thing," I said. "I haven't always been someone you could trust, but this isn't about me." He looked torn now. Between what he believed and what he was seeing, "I need you to think like an engineer," I said quietly. "Not like my son. Not like someone who's angry at me. Just look at the data." He stared at the folder again, then at the flash drive, then back at me. And for the first time since all of this began, I saw something I hadn't seen in him in years. Uncertainty. Not rejection, not anger, just uncertainty. "What if you're wrong?" he asked finally. I didn't hesitate. "Then I'll take responsibility," I said. The words hung in the air, heavy, honest. "But if I'm right," I continued, "then we don't have time to keep arguing." He swallowed, because he knew what that meant. Lives, consequences, failure that wouldn't just damage reputations, but people. "I need time," he said. I nodded. "Take it," I replied. I turned to leave, but then I stopped. "One more thing," I said without turning back. I said, "If you're going to decide what kind of engineer you are," I added quietly, Make sure it's not based on who you think I am. Silence followed me as I walked away. But this time, it felt different because something had shifted. Not everything, not yet, but enough for the truth to start breaking through. Andrew didn't come to me. Not that night, not the next morning, and for the first time since I had confronted him, I didn't chase him because something in his eyes had told me everything I needed to know. He had seen it. Not the whole truth, not yet, but enough to make him question everything. And doubt, real doubt, has a way of working through a person slowly, methodically, just like a stress fracture in steel. You don't always see it at first, but once it starts, it doesn't stop. I spent those days in a strange kind of stillness, waiting, not passively, but deliberately. I reviewed the files again, organized everything Thomas had given me, cross-referenced Richard's notes with the internal communications on the flash drive. The pattern became clearer with every hour. Dates didn't match. Revisions appeared without authorization. Material specifications were downgraded quietly, strategically. Not enough to trigger immediate failure, just enough to pass inspections, and just enough to ensure long-term risk. It was calculated, careful, intentional. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't see, was what Andrew was doing on his side. Until 3 days later. It was late evening when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. Unknown number, but something instinct maybe made me pick it up. Elise. I froze. Andrew. His voice was different. Not cold, not defensive. Something else. Tight. Controlled. Andrew. I said softly. I need to see you, he said. No hesitation, no explanation. Where? I asked. The site, he replied. After hours. I glanced at the clock. It was already past 9. I'll be there, I said. He hung up without another word. The drive there felt longer than usual. The roads were nearly empty, the city quieter than I remembered. Streetlights stretched out in long lines, guiding me towards something I couldn't quite define. By the time I arrived, the site was almost completely dark. Only a few overhead lights remained on, casting long shadows across the unfinished structure. And Andrew was already there, standing near the central support, waiting. I stepped out of the car, slowly, my heart steady but alert. Something had changed. I could feel it before he even spoke. You were right. The words came the moment I got close enough. No build-up, no resistance, just truth. I stopped walking. What happened? I asked. Andrew let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. I went back through everything he said. The reports, the revisions, the archived files. He looked at me then, and I saw it. Not anger, not resentment, but something far heavier. Guilt. I thought I had already reviewed it all, he continued, but I hadn't looked at the earlier versions, the ones before the final submission. My chest tightened, and I asked. He shook his head slowly. They don't match, he said. Not just your calculations, everything. He started pacing slightly like he used to when he was younger, when he was trying to solve something too big to hold still. They changed material grades, he said, reduced reinforcement in the core supports, adjusted tolerance margins. I nodded. I know. But it gets worse, he added. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. How? I asked. Andrew stopped pacing, looked directly at me. They knew he said. The words landed hard. What do you mean? I asked. They ran simulations, he continued. Internal ones, Not part of the official documentation. My breath caught. And those simulations showed long-term structural fatigue, he said. Not immediate failure, but progressive weakening over time. Exactly what Thomas had warned. Exactly what I had feared. And they approved it any way I asked. Andrew nodded once. Yes. Silence filled the space between us. Heavy, unforgiving. Who, I asked quietly, even though I already knew the answer. Andrew didn't hesitate. Victor Hale. The name echoed through the empty structure like something alive. And it wasn't just him, Andrew added. There were others, but he signed off on the final approval. I closed my eyes briefly, because hearing it confirmed, hearing it from Andrew, made it real in a way nothing else had. This isn't just negligence, I said. This is intentional. Andrew finished. We stood there for a moment, the weight of that word settling over both of us. Intentional. Not a mistake. Not an oversight. A decision. And there's more, Andrew said. I looked at him again. What? He hesitated, for the first time since I arrived, and something in that hesitation made my chest tighten. What is it? I asked. Andrew swallowed. I found something in the internal communication logs, he said slowly. What kind of communication? Emails, meeting records, authorization chains. I nodded, and he looked at me, his expression shifting again, this time into something closer to disbelief. My name is on them. For a moment, I didn't understand. What I asked. My approval signature, he said, on several revision checkpoints. My mind raced. That's not possible, I said. You said you didn't know. I didn't, he said quickly. I swear I didn't. I believed him, immediately, because I could see it. The shock, the confusion, the anger now turning inward. They used my credentials, he continued, or they had me sign off on things without full context. I felt the pieces falling into place. The meeting in Richard's photograph, Andrew in the background. Present, but not included. They positioned you, I said slowly. Close enough to validate the process, but not close enough to question it. Andrew nodded. Yes, and now they had something even more powerful. Not just altered data, but his name attached to it. If this comes out, he said quietly, it's not just them. I understood immediately. It's you too, I finished. He looked away. I accused you, he said. I signed off on your removal. I told them you were responsible. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. And I was wrong. I took a slow step closer. This isn't your fault, I said. He shook his head. It is, he replied. I didn't question it. I didn't look deeper. I just believed what I was given. I thought of Richard's letter. Children don't stop needing their parents. They just stop asking. And for the first time, Andrew looked like he needed something again. Guidance. Support. Not as a professional, but as my son. What matters now, I said gently, is what you do next. He looked at me, really looked. Not as Ms. Fairchild. Not as the woman who had disappointed him, but as me. What do we do? He asked. We. The word was small, but it changed everything. I took a breath. We expose it, I said. Andrew nodded slowly. And the bridge, he asked. I looked out at the structure, half-built, compromised, still standing for now. We fix it, I said, And for the first time in years, we were on the same side. The room felt smaller than it actually was. Or maybe it was just the weight of what we were about to do. The boardroom, same polished table, same neutral walls, same people who had once looked at me with respect, now felt like a courtroom. And this time, I wasn't the one on trial. Victor Hale sat at the far end of the table, composed as always. Crisp suit-controlled posture, the kind of man who had built his reputation on never appearing shaken. But I had spent enough years reading structural stress to recognize it in people, and today, there were cracks. Andrew stood beside me, not across from me, not against me, beside me. And that alone changed the atmosphere in the room. Because everyone noticed. Victor noticed most of all. I wasn't aware this meeting required additional attendees, he said smoothly, his eyes flicking toward Andrew. It does, Andrew replied before I could speak. His voice was calm, steady, professional. But there was something beneath it now. Something Victor hadn't heard before. Certainty. The rest of the board members exchanged glances, tension quietly building. Let's proceed, one of them said, trying to maintain order. I stepped forward, placing the folder on the table. For a moment, I didn't speak, because this wasn't just about presenting evidence. It was about choosing how to tell the truth. And once it was spoken, there would be no taking it back. The data used to justify my removal from this project was altered, I said finally. No hesitation, no apology. Just truth. Victor leaned back slightly unimpressed. That's a serious claim, he said. Do you have proof, Miss Fairchild? Ms. Fairchild. Not Elise. Not even the courtesy of neutrality. Just distance. That's why we're here, Andrew said. Again, we. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. Andrew stepped forward, opening the folder and sliding several documents across the table. These are the original design calculations submitted by Elise Fairchild, he said. Unaltered, verified. Murmurs began immediately. Quiet at first, then growing. Victor didn't touch the papers. He didn't need to, because he already knew what they were. And these, Andrew continued plugging the flash drive into the conference system, are internal communications and revision logs showing unauthorized modifications to those calculations. The screen lit up behind us. Emails, timestamps, version histories. Clear, undeniable. The room shifted. You could feel it. Like pressure building before a break. Victor stood slowly. Internal drafts and revisions are part of any large-scale project, he said calmly. This proves nothing except the normal evolution of design. Andrew didn't react, didn't argue. Instead, he clicked to the next file. A simulation report, one that had never been officially submitted. Then explain this, Andrew said. The room went quiet, completely. Internal simulation results, he continued. Run after the modifications were made. He paused, letting it settle. These simulations show long-term structural fatigue in the central supports, he said, a risk that increases over time. I watched the faces around the table, confusion, concern, fear. Victor's expression remained controlled, but only just. Simulations are predictive, Victor replied. Not definitive. They're used to explore possibilities, not determine outcomes. Andrew nodded slightly. That's true, he said. Then he took a step forward. But you didn't just explore this possibility, he added. You approved it. The words hit harder than anything else, because they weren't emotional. They were precise, targeted, accurate. Victor's composure slipped just for a second. Be careful, Andrew, he said quietly. You're making accusations that could damage more than just reputations. Andrew didn't back down. I'm aware, he replied, and then he did something I hadn't expected. something that shifted the entire room. "My name is on some of those approvals," he said. The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye turned to him, Victor included. "And that's exactly why I kept digging," Andrew continued. "Because I knew I hadn't reviewed the full context when I signed off on those revisions." He looked directly at Victor now. "You positioned me in the process just enough to validate it," he said, "but not enough to question it." Victor didn't respond. Not immediately, because there was no easy way out of that statement. "I trusted the system," Andrew added, "and the system was manipulated." The words landed like a fracture line through everything Victor had built. I stepped forward then, not to take over, but to stand with him. "This isn't just about professional misconduct," I said. "This is about knowingly approving a design that puts lives at risk." Victor finally moved. Not with panic, but with calculation. "You're both making assumptions," he said. "Complex projects require compromise, cost-efficiency timelines. These are realities you can't ignore." "Safety isn't a compromise," I said. His eyes met mine, cold, measured, "and neither is progress," he replied. There it was, the truth behind everything, not hidden, not disguised, just exposed. "You made a decision," I said, "and you justified it." Victor didn't deny it, because he didn't see it as wrong. He saw it as necessary. And that was the most dangerous part of all. One of the board members spoke up then. "Mr. Hale, were you aware of the simulation results before approving the revisions?" Victor hesitated, just long enough. "Yes," he said finally. The word echoed, clear, irreversible. "And you proceeded anyway?" another voice asked. Victor straightened slightly. "Yes," he said again, "because the probability of failure was low, acceptable within industry margins." A murmur of disbelief moved through the room. "Acceptable," someone repeated. For long-term fatigue, another added. Victor didn't flinch. "Every project carries risk," he said. "You mitigate what you can. You balance what you can't." "And you hide the rest?" Andrew asked quietly. That was it. The breaking point. Victor's control snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. "I delivered results," he said sharply. "On time, within budget. That's what this company needed." At what cost? The breaking point. Victor's control snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. "I delivered results," he said sharply. "On time, within budget. That's what this company needed. At what cost? I asked. He didn't answer. Because now, everyone in the room knew. The board began speaking over one another. Questions, concerns, decisions forming in real time, an emergency review, immediate suspension of construction, independent investigation. Victor stood there as it unfolded, no longer in control of the narrative he had carefully built. And for the first time, he looked like a man who had miscalculated. Not the numbers, but the consequences. I turned slightly toward Andrew. He didn't look at me. Not yet. But he didn't step away either. And that was enough. Because this time, we hadn't just exposed the truth. We had faced it. Together. Justice doesn't feel the way people think it does. It doesn't arrive with relief or satisfaction, or even victory. It arrives quietly, almost awkwardly. Like something that doesn't quite know where it belongs after everything that came before it. That was how it felt in the days after the meeting. Victor Hale was suspended immediately, then formally removed. The investigation moved faster than I expected, faster than most corporate processes ever do. Because this time, there was too much at stake, too much evidence, too many eyes watching. The project was halted. Completely. Construction crews dismissed, site sealed, independent engineers brought in to reassess the entire structure. And just like that, everything Victor had built collapsed. Not physically, not yet, but reputationally, irreversibly. The news picked it up within 48 hours. Executive oversight failure in major infrastructure, project safety concerns lead to immediate shutdown. Internal documents reveal unauthorized design changes. My name appeared again, but this time, the headline was different. Engineer cleared after evidence emerges. I watched it from my living room. The same television, the same seat, but nothing felt the same. Because even though the narrative had shifted, the damage hadn't disappeared. It had just changed shape. The phone started ringing again. But this time, the voices were different, apologetic, careful, respectful. Elise, we should have listened. I'm so sorry for doubting you. You were right all along. I listened. I nodded. I thanked them. But I didn't feel what they expected me to feel. Because being right didn't undo what had already happened. Didn't erase the moment my son had looked at me like I was a stranger. Didn't fix the years that had led us there. And that was the part no one else could see. The part that didn't make headlines. The part that still hurt. A week later, I was called back to the site. Officially this time. Not as an outsider. Not as a problem to be removed. But as the original lead engineer. Reinstated. Restored. Validated. The irony wasn't lost on me. I stood at the edge of the bridge again, just like I had before. But everything felt different now. The structure looked the same. Steel beams, concrete foundations, unfinished spans stretching across the river. But now I could see the flaws. Not just in the design, but in the decisions that had shaped it. They're recommending a full redesign of the central support system. I turned at the sound of the voice. Andrew, standing a few feet behind me, not distant, not guarded, just there. That's the right call, I said. He nodded. They want you to lead it, he added. I looked back at the bridge, at everything it represented, and for a moment, I didn't answer. Because this wasn't just another project anymore. It was something else, something heavier. They asked me too, Andrew said. I glanced at him. To stay on, he clarified, as part of the redesign team. And? I asked. He hesitated. Just slightly. I told them I'd only do it if you agreed to come back. That caught me off guard. Why, I asked. Andrew looked out at the structure, his expression thoughtful. Because I don't want to build something like this again, he said quietly. Not without knowing it's right. There was something in his voice I hadn't heard in a long time. Not just professionalism, not just responsibility, but humility, growth, and something else. Trust. I studied him for a moment, the man he had become, the distance we had carried, the truth we had finally faced. I'll come back, I said. He nodded once. No hesitation, no overreaction, just understanding. We stood there in silence for a while, not uncomfortable, not forced, just quiet. And for the first time in years, it felt like something real. Mom. The word caught me off guard. Because he hadn't used it like that in a long time. Not without Tanishan. Not without distance. Just, and for the first time in years, it felt like something real. Mom. The word caught me off guard, because he hadn't used it like that in a long time, not without tension, not without distance. Justin John, not without distance, just naturally. Yes, I replied. He didn't look at me immediately. I was wrong, he said. Simple, direct, honest. I felt something shift inside me. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just a release. I was too, I said. He frowned slightly. No, he replied. It wasn't just about the bridge. I interrupted gently. He went quiet, and I continued. I wasn't there for you, I said. Not the way I should have been. He didn't respond, but he didn't walk away either. And I told myself, you didn't need me anymore, I added, because it was easier than admitting I had already missed too much. The truth felt heavier out loud, but also necessary. Andrew exhaled slowly. I didn't stop needing you, he said. I nodded. I know. Another silence, but this one different. Not filled with tension, but with something softer, something rebuilding. I thought you chose work over me, he said. I thought you didn't want me there, I replied. We both let that sit, because now we understood, not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Guess we were both wrong, he said quietly. I smiled slightly. Seems that way. We stood there a little longer watching the unfinished bridge stretch out in front of us, a structure that had almost become a symbol of failure. Now something else, something unfinished, but not broken. Not anymore. They're going to rename it, Andrew said after a moment. I raised an eyebrow. Really? He nodded. New project, new oversight, new leadership. I looked back at the steel beams, the lines of the design I still knew by heart. What will they call it? I asked. Andrew hesitated, then finally looked at me. They asked me that too, he said. And he held my gaze. I told them they should keep your name on it. My breath caught. Andrew. Because you did build it, he said. Even if no one saw it at first. The words settled deep. Not as validation, not as recognition, but as something far more important. Understanding. And for the first time since all of this began, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything anymore. Because the one person I needed to reach was finally listening. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't arrive like a moment of clarity or a single conversation that fixes everything. If anything, it feels slower than that, quieter. Like something fragile being rebuilt piece by piece. That's what it was like with Andrew and me. Not a sudden reconciliation. Not an emotional embrace that erased the past. But something more real. Something that took time. The redesign process began 2 weeks later. Officially, I was reinstated as lead engineer. Unofficially, I was stepping back into a role that felt heavier than anything I had carried before. Because this time, it wasn't just about getting it right. It was about rebuilding trust in the structure, in the system, and in the people working alongside me, including my son. Andrew and I didn't talk much at first, not outside of work, not in the way people might expect after everything that had happened, but something had changed. We communicated, directly, clearly, without the walls that had once defined every conversation between us. Load tolerance here needs to be increased, he said one afternoon, pointing at the revised design. I was thinking the same, I replied. We'll need to adjust the material grade too. He nodded. No hesitation, no challenge for the sake of proving something, just collaboration. It felt unfamiliar, but not uncomfortable, and slowly that unfamiliar feeling began to shift into something else, something steady, something that resembled what we had lost. One evening, after a long day on site, we stayed behind. The crew had already left. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the unfinished structure. It reminded me of the night everything changed. But this time, the silence felt different, lighter. Do you remember the Denver project? I asked suddenly. Andrew looked up from the plans. The suspension bridge, he asked. I smiled slightly. You know about it? He shrugged. I looked it up, he said. A while ago. That surprised me. I didn't think you cared, I admitted. I didn't think you noticed, he replied. The words weren't sharp. Not anymore, just honest. We stood there for a moment, letting that truth settle between us. I used to think that was enough, I said quietly. Building things like that? Knowing I had done something that lasted, Andrew didn't interrupt, didn't correct me. He just listened. But I didn't realize, I continued, that the things that matter most don't leave behind blueprints. I looked at him then, like showing up, I added. He held my gaze for a second, then nodded slightly. I used to wait, he said. My chest tightened. For what I asked, even though I already knew. For you, he replied. The simplicity of it hurt more than anything else ever had. I know, I said, and this time I didn't try to explain, didn't try to justify. I just let it be true. I thought if I worked hard enough, I added, if I built something important enough, it would make up for everything I missed. Andrew shook his head gently. It didn't, he said. I know, I replied. Silence followed, but not the kind that pushes people apart, the kind that allows something real to exist. I should have told you about the internship, he said after a moment. I looked at him. You were 19, I said. You didn't owe me anything. I wasn't trying to prove something to you, he admitted. I was trying to prove something to myself. I nodded. I understand that now. He exhaled slowly, looking out at the structure in front of us. I thought if I could succeed without you, he said, then it wouldn't hurt as much. And did it? I asked. He gave a small, almost sad smile. No, he said. It just made everything quieter. That word stayed with me. Quieter. Not better, not healed, just empty. I'm sorry, I said. Not carefully, not strategically, just honestly. For what? He asked. For not being there, I said. For not seeing what you needed, for thinking I had more time than I did. Andrew didn't respond right away, and for a second I wondered if I had said it too late, if the moment had already passed. But then, it mattered, he said. I blinked. What did you saying that? He replied. And just like that, something shifted again. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough to make the next moment possible. We stood side by side, looking out at the bridge. The revised plans were already taking shape. Stronger, safer, better. This one will hold, Andrew said quietly. I nodded. Yes, I replied. It will. But I wasn't just talking about the bridge, and I think he knew that. A few days later, we had dinner together. The first time in years. Not at a restaurant, not somewhere neutral. At home. The same house that had once felt hollow, now slowly filling with something else. We didn't talk about everything, not yet. But we didn't avoid things either. We talked about work, about Richard, about small things that used to feel impossible to say. And somewhere in between, we started to find something again. Not what we had before, that was gone, but something new, something built with truth instead of assumption, with presence instead of absence, with understanding instead of distance. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The day the bridge opened, the sky was impossibly clear. The kind of blue that feels almost deliberate, as if the world itself is trying to mark the moment. I stood at the edge of the crowd, hands loosely clasped in front of me, watching as people gathered along the newly completed span. Families, engineers, city officials, journalists, all of them there to witness something that just months ago had nearly become a failure, buried in silence. Now it stood strong, not just repaired, rebuilt, reimagined, and for the first time since this entire journey began, I allowed myself to look at it not as a problem to solve, but as something finished, something real. "You're supposed to be up there." Andrew's voice came from beside me. I didn't turn immediately. Instead, I kept my eyes on the structure. "I've spent most of my life standing on stages like that," I said. "It doesn't feel as important anymore." He stepped closer, following my gaze. "It should," he said. I shook my head slightly. "What matters is that it's safe," I replied. "That it holds." Andrew was quiet for a moment. "Then, it holds because of you." I finally looked at him. There was no hesitation in his expression, no doubt, just certainty and something deeper. Respect, not the kind that comes from titles or reputation, but the kind that's earned, under pressure, through truth. "I didn't do it alone," I said. "You never had to," he replied. The words settled between us. Simple, but they carried something we had both spent years avoiding. The idea that we were never meant to stand apart. That strength didn't come from independence alone, but from connection, from trust, from showing up. A voice over the loudspeaker called for attention. The ceremony was beginning. City officials stepped forward, giving speeches about progress, safety, resilience. Words that sounded familiar, predictable. But this time, they didn't feel empty. Because behind those words was something real. A story no one fully knew, except us. And now one of the officials announced, "We would like to recognize the engineer whose original design and unwavering commitment to safety made this project possible." I felt Andrew glance at me. "Come on," he said quietly. I hesitated. Just for a second, because stepping forward meant being seen again. Not just for what I had built, but for everything that had happened, everything I had been, everything I had learned. And then I took a step, and another, until I was standing at the front, facing the crowd, facing the bridge, facing everything I had once believed mattered most. They handed me a plaque, simple, engraved, my name, Elise Fairchild, and beneath it, lead structural engineer. But that wasn't what held my attention. It was the line below. "For integrity that stands stronger than steel." My throat tightened slightly. Because this wasn't just recognition. It was understanding. Something I had chased for years without realizing what it really meant. Applause filled the air. Polite at first, then stronger, more genuine. I nodded, said a few words, thanked the team, acknowledged the importance of safety, of responsibility, of doing things the right way, even when it costs more, takes longer, demands more than you think you can give. But I didn't talk about everything. Some things aren't meant for a stage. They're meant for quieter moments, for conversations that don't need an audience. After the ceremony, people began to cross the bridge, slowly at first, then in steady streams, testing it, trusting it, living with it. And I stood back again watching, just like before. But this time, I wasn't alone. Andrew stood beside me, close enough that I could feel his presence without needing to look. "It's strange," he said after a while. "What is?" I asked. "I used to think this was the goal," he replied, gesturing toward the bridge, finishing something like this. "And now?" I asked. He thought for a moment. "Now I think it's just part of it," he said. I smiled slightly. "That's a good way to see it." He nodded. "I learned that from you," he added. I raised an eyebrow. "Recently," he clarified, almost smiling. We stood there in comfortable silence as the sun began to lower, casting warm light across the structure. The bridge didn't just stand. It belonged to the city, to the people, to the future. And for the first time, I felt like I belonged too. Not because of what I had built, but because of what I had finally understood. "Mom." The word came easily now, naturally. "Yes," I replied. He didn't look at me right away. "I used to say you never built anything that mattered," he said. I remembered every word, every accusation, every moment it had cut deeper than I let myself admit. "And now?" I asked quietly. He turned to me, and this time there was no distance left in his eyes. "I was wrong," he said, not defensively, not reluctantly, just honestly. I nodded, because I didn't need more than that. "You built this," he continued, glancing at the bridge. "But more than that." He paused, searching for the right words. "You searching for the right words. "You me back," he said finally. "You stayed. You fixed it." I felt something shift inside me. Not pride, not validation. Something quieter, something deeper. Peace. "I should have stayed a long time ago," I said. "Maybe me back," he said finally. "You stayed. You fixed it." I felt something shift inside me. Not pride, not validation. Something quieter, something deeper. Peace. "I should have stayed a long time ago," I said. "Maybe," he replied. "But you're here now, and for the first time, that felt like enough." We began walking across the bridge together, not as engineer and assistant, not as two people trying to prove something, but as mother and son, side by side. The structure beneath our feet solid, reliable, built to last. And somewhere in the distance, I could almost hear Richard's voice again, not as a memory, but as something carried forward. "Not until you really need to." He had been right about everything, because this wasn't just about a bridge. It was about what it represented, what it connected, what it held together. Not steel, not concrete, but people. And as we reached the center span, I stopped for a moment, looking out over the water below. The reflection of the bridge stretched across the surface, steady and unbroken. Just like the structure above, just like something inside me now, for the first time in years. Nothing felt like it was about to collapse. And that was what I had been building all along. What this story truly reminds us is something many of us only realize later in life. Success is not measured by what we build, but by who we show up for. Elise spent years believing that if she created something strong enough, lasting enough, meaningful enough, it would somehow make up for the moments she missed as a mother. And Andrew spent just as many years believing that if he could stand on his own without her, he wouldn't feel the absence so deeply. Both were strong. Both were capable. And yet both were quietly hurting. Because the truth is, love doesn't work like that. You can build bridges of steel and concrete that stand for decades. But if you don't build connection with the people who matter, there will always be something missing. And sometimes, the hardest thing isn't fixing what's broken. It's admitting that something was broken in the first place. But here's the most powerful part of this story. It's never too late. Not too late to tell the truth. Not too late to take responsibility. Not too late to rebuild something that once felt lost. Elise and Andrew didn't go back to who they used to be. They became something better, something honest, something real. And that's what healing looks like. Not perfection, not erasing the past, but choosing day by day to do things differently. So if there's someone in your life you've drifted away from, maybe this is your moment. Not to fix everything at once, but to take one step, one conversation, one truth. And if this story touched you in any way, I'd really love to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Have you ever had to rebuild a relationship that felt broken? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. And if you believe in stories about second chances, healing, and finding your way back to the people who matter most, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. There's always another story waiting for you.